Health and environmental concerns are growing over Japan's plan to dump massive amounts of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. The wastewater is from the Fukushima nuclear accident 10 years ago. It's been treated but still radioactive. The Japanese government is expected to make a formal announcement soon. For more on that, let's cross live to our correspondent Phoebe Amoroso in Tokyo. Phoebe, is the Japanese government fully aware of the potential environmental damage this will cause?
Yes, I think they have made certain provisions. Certainly, last year, a government advisory panel gave them with two different options with how to deal with this waste. One was to evaporate it, and the second option was to release it slowly into the sea. Now, they made several provisions based on this. The idea would be to dilute it to 1/40th of the set national safety standards, and then release it slowly over 3 decades. So there's said to be no impact on human health. However, there is very strong opposition from the fisheries.
Some experts suggest nuclear wastewater be poured into the ocean. There is no support for this among fishery workers and the Japanese public. I strongly oppose this idea as well.
So very strong words there. One of the biggest concerns is reputational damage. Produce from Fukushima has been very much doubted among the public, both domestically and internationally, and sales fell for several years after the disaster in 2011. And internationally, still 15 countries and regions no longer import Fukushima marine produce. Now, the reputational damage is still worried, they're still concerned that this could continue. And the fisheries have spoken out many times about this, and the public as well. A survey earlier this month, or last month, said that 51% of the public are strongly against the waste being released, and only 18% are in favour. So there is a very strong anti-nuclear sentiment here in Japan, and that has grown since 2011. Unfortunately, Tokyo Electric Power Company that runs the plant did cover up the fact that there had been a meltdown for 2 months after the disaster, and that caused a huge amount of trust issues. Now, one of the reasons why the government is trying to make this decision now is that currently more than 100 tons of groundwater are leaking into the basements of the damaged reactors. Now, this is mixing with radioactive debris, and TEPCO, who manages the facilities, they are purifying this, but it leaves behind tritium. So this wastewater, it has to be stored somewhere, and they're running out of capacity. It's said to be reaching capacity around autumn 2022. So there is some pressure to make a decision quickly, because even if they do release the water into the sea, it's going to take about 2 years of preparations. And there is another factor to consider. This is only one step of the decommissioning process. There is still a huge amount of radioactive debris that needs to be removed underneath the reactors, and they've been using underwater robots to investigate how this is going to be removed. But this has been delayed due to the pandemic has impacted their robotics partner in the UK. But the question is, when this is removed, it leaves them in a very similar position to currently what to do with this radioactive debris. So we're seeing the government really trying to move forward on this despite the domestic opposition.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Phoebe Amoroso in Tokyo. The UN nuclear watchdog is showing some support for Japan's plan to dump the wastewater into the ocean. The IAEA says releasing nuclear water into the ocean is a standard practice globally. Japan had asked the agency to assess its plan. However, Japan's neighbors are still urging for caution.
The radioactive leakage from Japan's Fukushima nuclear accident has already had a profound impact on the marine environment, food safety, and human health. the Japanese government should take a responsible attitude to its nationals, neighboring countries, and the international community, conduct an in-depth assessment of the potential impact of the treatment for wastewater containing tritium at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, voluntarily disclose information in a strictly accurate, open, and transparent manner, and make cautious decisions on the basis of full consultation with neighboring countries.
Now let's cross live to our correspondent Jack Barton in Seoul for more reactions. So Jack, South Korea is literally connected to Japan by water. So how's the country and its people reacting to the possible Japanese government's decision?
Well, South Korea is one of those 15 countries we heard about that does have an import ban on a number of agricultural and seafood products from Japan because of the Fukushima accident, and it's been gravely concerned about this situation all along. And in terms of public opinion, this is one subject that really is it is widespread. The majority of South Koreans oppose this decision. The opposition parties and the main ruling party are essentially on the same page, and it's one issue that pretty much everyone is unified on at the moment in their opposition. The government's been making strong comments about this since 2019. President Moon Jae-in's government says it's gravely aware and there is serious concern. It's called for transparency about the entire process. And the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans here says this shouldn't be a sovereign decision by Japan. It should be an international decision, particularly, input from countries in the region, even though that the US and France and, as we heard before, the International Atomic Energy Agency have indicated that they believe, this could go ahead. The other big concern here, again, as we just heard, is this wouldn't be a one-off event. This would be the beginning of a process. In Chernobyl, the nuclear reactor that was in the Soviet Union is in present-day Ukraine that had 570 tons of nuclear waste. Ukraine says that will take 100 years to be removed. Fukushima has 1,100 tons, and even if they can remove that faster than the Ukrainians can, one would still imagine that will take longer than 100 years. So once this process begins, it will have to continue beginning the release of this water into the ocean. And Greenpeace alleges, the reports that say that the really dangerous material like radioactive iodine and strontium have been removed, completely removed. They allege that leaked government reports say that's not so. So, here they believe if Japan probably wants to go ahead with it, they're going to, but they want as much international oversight and as much transparency as possible. And publicly, they'll keep saying they oppose it right up until it happens.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Jack Barton in Seoul. For more insight, let's now cross live to Professor Li Ji in Shanghai. He's with the School of Oceanography at Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. So how about we start with this possible Japanese government's approach to deal with those contaminated water, diluting them first and then slowly discharge them into the Pacific Ocean. But that doesn't change the whole amount of those radioactive waters, and the radioactivity just won't go away. What do you make of this approach?
You are exactly right. They are not changing the total amount of radioactive pollutant getting into the Pacific. Once they get into the Pacific, they will be diluted to a low level, but they are not only radioactive hydrogen in that water. There are also other radioactive compounds as like carbon-14, cobalt-60, and iodine-131. So those are maybe more dangerous radioactive compounds. Those pollutants will be carried by join the ocean circulation, be carried by the ocean current. They may reach as far as the U.S. coast before they reach China, because that's how the ocean current runs in the Pacific. So that's the problem with how much negative impact is this total amount pollutant, either it's diluted or not before the discharge, and how it's draw a much longer time concern about the risk of this radioactive compounds.
Now, Professor, break down that worrying scenario you just described. How much damage will it actually cause to the maritime ecology, and eventually, how would that affect human daily life and even whole human society?
Okay, this radioactive compound, they go to the ocean, they have immediately concern for local marine lives, and as even they close the fish field near that site. But in the longer term, they have the concerns for people who consume it. As you know, the marine life, they take up all the water. They have this process we call bioaccumulation. So from the algae to fish to plankton, they will gradually accumulate all this compound in their body, and this after like the go through the food chain, this radioactive compound can be reach a much higher level in the stomach, or like the shellfish, like the fish, and so this bioaccumulation process may increase the risk or the concerns for the people who finally consume it. But so this needs to be a much longer term monitoring program to look at the radioactivity level in the seafood.
So what do you make of the new UN nuclear watchdog's remarks? It says Japan's decision meets global standards of practice. So we know there are standards, but has the world ever seen the discharge of such a large amount of radioactive water into the ocean? And do you think it should be treated as an extraordinary case?
I agree with you, yes. There are standards, and this standard is for a normal operation of like a nuclear power plant. They discharge their cooling water at a very, very low standard, at a very low amount. But for this case, as you say, they try to meet the standard by dilute it before they discharge it. So for me, it's kind of, it's like a cover-up. It's also that the agency, they said the IAEA, they are not authority for such case. In my knowledge, they are an intergovernment forum for discuss this kind of problem, but they don't have the authority to decide if it can do or not.
Thank you very much, Professor Li Ji in Shanghai.